morning, everybody. It's so nice to kind of see you, right, at this point. So let's go through. We've got a lot of good things that we want to cover. And for some reason, there we go. My slides were not advancing, but now they are. So let me take you through what we want to do over the next half hour. And I know we don't have a ton of time, but we want to hit a few points I think that are really important right now for us to discuss, to think about at this point in time. The first thing is we want to take a couple of minutes to share, and Kelly alluded to a lot of the issues that we're seeing, but we want to share some of the things that we've been hearing from people all over the country that are in very similar circumstances. Some of this may resonate with you, some of it may not. I'm sure there are other things that you guys are experiencing that we haven't covered, but let's take a look and get on the same page with what things are like right now for yourself and for the people that you're leading. And then really we want to dive into this concept of resilience. And we know that all of you are some of the most resilient people that I've ever worked with. And it's important right now to really rely and leverage that as you go through these very difficult days. And we want to help you see a couple of things. The one, we want to talk about how the way that you frame your experience, the narrative, right, that you tell yourself about things that are happening in your daily work, how important it is to really think about that right now and control that narrative. And the third thing is we want to say how important it is to recognize that we do have choices in how we cope with the circumstances right now. So we want to delve into that and hopefully give you some tips and strategies for how to maybe do that in a better way and be more mindful of things as you go through your day. Okay, so let's start. Oh, firstly, yes, let me orient you to, so a couple of things at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your mouse over, you'll see this bar at the bottom. Now, we're not going to be using our chat function. This is new technology to all of us, so if we have a few bumps, let's ride them out together. We're not going to be using chat. We are going to be using the Q&A box that you guys were able to start using. And when you type in your question, again, this is just an example, you want to recognize that one, you can do it either anonymously or with your name. It's going to be visible to everybody. So that's the other thing you want to recognize. And we want to track questions as we go. We're at the end. The fun thing is you can upvote questions that you see from others that maybe are pertinent, or you also have the same question, and then we can look at those. They'll rise to the top and we'll refer back to those at the end of the session. Okay. So let's jump in and start looking at some of the things that we really have been hearing from clinicians around the country.
So I think if we start to look at people's responses, like most things, we end up with some kind of a bell-shaped curve. And at one extreme, on my left, is the scenario of complete denial, where this is no big deal. We're blowing this out of proportion. I'm ready to go back to work. Thank you very much. And life begins again. And of course, we have the other where the end is near. And most of us are somewhere in the middle. Not complacent and hopefully not panicking. But the one thing that I think everyone shares on this curve is a fair amount of fear. And it's triggered by the uncertainty of where we are. A lot of things are out of our control. Our amygdala is on high gear. And I think all of us realize that we don't necessarily make the best decisions, and we don't necessarily demonstrate our best behavior when our amygdala is stimulated to fight or flight. So we want to talk a lot today about what we can do about the amygdala hijack, how to get ourselves and our colleagues back into a space where we can deal with the uncertainty in a much more positive manner.
Right. So there are some themes, and Kelly started sharing some of the things that she's been seeing, but I put this slide together kind of as a visual, because when I started really thinking about and seeing the amount of things that people have on their plate right now, you've got your clinician in the center, all around, you've got all these other issues happening. You've got a lot of issues with fear, right? Fear around use and availability of PPE, about being exposed. Am I going to take it home, right? Feelings of loss of control, loss of normal routine. There's so many things that are happening right now. And not only the things that are in the center here, but you've got all these other things going on as well, right? You've got anxiety around friends, around family, around politics, you know, around uncertainty. What happens if I get sick? I mean, it's really unbelievable to me how much people have on their plates, on top of having to take care of some incredibly sick people and do your job well. So I put this up because I want to recognize the weight that people are carrying around right now, and you may be experiencing this too. It may resonate with you. And I put this up because I want you to have some self-compassion and also recognize when you see things happening around you, where you see bad behavior, or you see people doing things and not cooperating, or, you know, we're quick to read into that. And what I want to recognize is some of that behavior may very well be a manifestation of some of these things. And we just don't consider that. We need to be very, very mindful for the amount of uncertainty that people have right now on their plates. Any thoughts, Fred, that you want to share on that?
No, I think it's important. And I think as we talk today, we're going to make sure that everyone here understands that we're not denying any of this exists. We're aware it exists. It's impactful and it's important. And today's discussion is not going to be about any strategies to get rid of these, because quite frankly, we don't know what they are.
Okay. So let's talk about this issue of resilience, because like I said, this is at this time when things are so difficult, when things are so ambiguous, we really need to rely on the resilience that we have, and not just that, but to develop it. And I know all of you are in positions of leadership, so you're worried about trying to help your people through it as well. And we will be getting to that in the next webinar. In this webinar, I really want you to focus on yourself. This is all about you today. And so how do we get ourselves through this, and why is resilience so important to us right now?
So we want to make sure we understand what we mean by being resilient. And resilient, the word itself came into fashion with studying of physical properties. This is a very high shutter speed picture of a soon-to-be home run. And you can see the deformity in the baseball, but you won't see this without a special camera, because the baseball is so resilient that it meets the force and then it reshapes itself in its original shape. And that's what resilience means psychologically as well. It means being able to absorb a force, and certainly all the things that Ashley just showed you are these terrible forces that are upon us, especially upon you as clinicians, and being able to sort of bounce back and maintain the integrity of who you were before all this started. It's the ability really to be able to bend and not to break.
Right. Right. And we're in quite a storm, right?
The storm, yep.
Yeah. So given that there's so much going on, and given that you guys have so much on your plate, you know, the ability to bend and not break really has a lot to do on your ability to maintain a healthy perspective when things are difficult. And this is not easy. What we know is that emotional intensity, right, amygdalas firing all over the place, really do cloud people's ability to maintain perspective. And so I want you to be mindful and think about how you focus on these two things. And the first one is about being able to really understand and look at and control the narrative that you have around things. And the second thing that we're going to look at is the idea of making some space for being optimistic, even in these difficult situations that we're in. So let's take a look at that first.
So for those of you who have been in the seminars we've run, you've heard about the ladder of inference. For those of you who haven't, I would strongly suggest after this talk sometime soon, you Google the ladder of inference. It will talk in detail about some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And the ladder of inference is a descriptive way in which our brains work. It's been shown since its discovery to actually have some science to it through PET scanning. But basically, the human brain does not tolerate ambiguity very well. We need to understand what's happening to us. And we will fill in ambiguity with stories that we tell ourselves. And it begins with the factual matters that we see. We then focus on certain of those facts. We then begin to build a narrative around that. we take in beliefs, past experiences, things that have happened to us in the past that tend to confirm that narrative. And then we take an action based on the narrative we're telling us. This happens within a nanosecond, and it happens to all of us. Sometimes it's good when you're in the ICU and someone is in respiratory failure. It's very nice to be able to tell yourself the narrative that it's time to intubate this patient. On the other hand, in terms of human interaction, we typically have more time than we think to react. So it's about recognizing that we're in an emotional state, and it's a way to get out of that emotional state so that our behavior will be much more human than it would be acting like the reptile that we still have in our back of our head. So one, we need to stop. And what we need to stop doing is the following. We need to stop thinking that our narrative is correct, that it is the only narrative, and therefore everyone else's is wrong. And we get stuck in a narrative because we feel the need to defend it, and we tend to find things to help us defend it. And most importantly, we need to stop thinking that our narrative is always productive and helpful, because often our narrative gets in our own way of behaving properly. What we need to start doing is we need to start questioning the stories. Is this narrative really a narrative that's going to be useful? Is it correct? Could there be other narratives? And more importantly, what are the narratives going on in the people we work with, and recognizing that they're usually different than our own narratives.
Yeah. And Fred, can I add something too? I think that one thing we need to be really cognizant of right now is that these narratives exist every day, all the time, right? That's part of being a human being. In times of difficulty, in times of high stress, emotional intensity, you're going to be seeing these narratives go, they're going to be coming at you a lot faster. You're going to be experiencing them a lot faster. We tend to start seeing intention. We tend to start seeing reason for things that are happening and relaying intention as we're moving quickly onto something else. We need to really recognize when they're there and try to take the ability to pause, right? And pause for a moment and question whether or not the narrative that you have in your mind, is it helpful, and is it necessarily 100% accurate?
Right.
Question that.
So the question is, how do you ask those questions? What questions should you be asking? And basically, in order to be aware of our narrative, we need to start asking ourselves, am I taking this personally? Do I see this as my narrative is there a punitive part of my narrative? Do I see this as some kind of punishment or unfairness? And am I seeing this as personal? The 3 Ps of bad narratives. And in order to unframe that, in order to move ahead, we should start asking the following questions. Is this difficulty external to me? Does this have nothing to do with me? There's a difference between being unfortunate and punitive. It no doubt is unfortunate. Is it really punitive? And is this going to last forever? Or is it temporary, even if we don't know the boundaries of that temporary state? When we're able to ask those questions to us before we react, and it helps us form a different narrative, an alternative narrative, which hopefully will not have any of these 3 and be a much more positive way of moving forward.
I think too, the one thing we want to be aware of with this is the power of the words that we choose, right? The power of the words that we choose in the way that we speak about this to ourselves and to others, but especially to ourselves, right? Sometimes we can use words in our thinking about things that become very inflammatory. That can be, like Fred, you were talking about, is this a crisis or is this a catastrophe? We tend to go, when anxiety is high, when there's a lot going on, we tend to go to the worst case scenario. So we need to be very mindful of how we speak about this to ourselves.
Yeah, and another common trap is, I'm going to confront this problem. Well, actually, we were hoping you would go to find a solution to the problem. Once you're telling yourself you're going to confront the problem, you no doubt will, and it's unlikely that you're going to be as successful as you'd like to be.
Correct. So how we frame our circumstance is really critical. And I love this quote because it says, we don't see things as the way they are, we see them as we are. And there's such truth to that. The experience that we have in any circumstance is really colored by the lens that we choose to look through. And it is a choice. It is a choice. So something I want to share with you is looking at this picture. A question is, what do you see? Do you see a weed or do you see a wish, right? The picture itself hasn't changed, right? But our intention with it and our belief around it has. And so it's really important to think about how we think about our circumstance right now, because if you are stuck in a very negative frame with the way you're looking, even with things as difficult as they are, it is very, very difficult to make space for anything that looks productive, optimistic. And I'm not talking about, you know, optimism in the fact that everything's going to be fine and pie in the sky kind of thing. No. What I'm talking about is kind of what Fred and I talked about in the course about being a optimistic realist, right? But you have a choice in what that optimistic realism looks like, right? Because if you can frame your circumstance in a positive way, in a productive way, it creates space for hope, both for yourself and for others around you. And this does have a ripple effect. And hope has been shown to be much more important than feelings of fear in how people adapt to difficult circumstances. Hope is powerful. And so we need to make space for that, because what it does is it really helps to provide that counterbalance that we need to offset the fear and the anxiety and the anger and the angst that's going on around us, both within ourselves and with the people around us, right? So I want you to think about that.
So another way I think of putting that actually would be that fear often brings out the worst in all of us, and hope invariably brings out the best in all of us. And the choice is really ours in terms of how we perceive.
It is a choice. I want you guys to be mindful of this fact too, that being an optimistic realist is also about accepting what is. And I know this sounds kind of crazy, but when you're in a state where there's high emotional intensity, whether you're experiencing anxiety or whatever it might be, if you're in difficulty, the more that you fight against that concept that there's difficulty, right? The worse it gets. So not only are you anxious, which right now is an incredibly valid and appropriate sentiment and feeling, right? But now you're anxious about being anxious. So you've layered on this whole other sort of meta difficulty that you absolutely don't need. So, you know, clients that I'm working with right now who really are in this feeling of just discombobulation, they're having trouble with things at home, with things at work, they're struggling with how to kind of just keep their head above water. And instead of fighting against it, think about how to just be okay with it, right? Just be in it, just allow for it. And there's power in that. It grounds you, right? You're not denying that things are difficult in any way, but you're just being able to say, okay, and right? And move forward. Because in order to create a path, a productive path forward, the level of acceptance is really, really critical, right? Any thoughts on that, Fred, before I move on?
No, I think we'll talk about that in more detail the next slide.
Okay, yeah.
So what we're talking, this is another one of Ashley's great slides. You know, the more I see this, the more meaningful it is to me. But I think what I want to point out is some important things here. One is it's unclear who's rescuing whom, but it is clear to me that in order to rescue someone, you have to have some strength yourself. So some of what we're saying today may sound selfish, but it's actually quite altruistic. You're of no use to anyone if you're not strong, both physically and emotionally. So a lot of it is how we see the world, and I realize there's a lot of things to look around and interpret with depression, but I'll give you a great quote from my hero Winston Churchill, who said that pessimists see the difficulty in every opportunity, where optimists see the opportunity in every difficulty. So if you think about it, there's lots of opportunity out there because there's lots of difficulty there. And it really depends on how we frame our experience. The important thing here is that our emotions are contagious, probably more contagious than the coronavirus. And we may think that people don't see how we're acting and feeling, but they do, whether we like it or not. We have influence all the time. And especially in positions that you are in, you're looked upon as leaders, as experts in the field, as people who other people are depending on. So it is crucial that we are able to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. And there are some ways of doing this, some ways of sort of practicing good emotional hygiene. These are just some suggestions. I'm sure you guys can come up with a lot more, but why not just shut off channels of information that are consistently negative and not particularly helpful? I think we're all seeing that. Making time, being intentional about dealing with this. It is amazing how much better you feel about yourself when you intentionally express gratitude to other people, and especially to your colleagues that you're working with all the time, when you express kindness. And this has to be intentional because our minds are so absorbed with the everyday crises that we're dealing with that if we don't intentionally do this, it may not happen. So take some time to practice mindfulness, whether it be through meditation, through exercise, prayer, paying attention to small moments, recognizing the sunrise and the sunset, or for some of you, the stars out in the sky when you come home at midnight. The beauty that's still in the world is not to be underestimated.
Yeah, absolutely. So something I want to think about here is when times are difficult, when there's a lot going on, when people have a lot on their plate, what we tend to do as human beings is really start focusing on the myriad of things that we can't control, right? We can't control what other people feel, what they think, what they do, whether or not they follow the rules, what their motives are, whether or not they make mistakes. I mean, none of that, right? We can't control our feelings, certainly can't control politics, right? Anything about this virus. So there's a lot out there right now, and this stuff takes up a ton of emotional energy, right? And a lot of mental real estate right now. And we spend a lot of time focusing on that. And what our challenge is to recognize that we do have things in our control, and likely more than we think, right? And as we start to focus on those, the things that we can't control start to fade away. And these are really, really important for you all to think about what you do have control over today, right now, right? You have control over what you do with your feelings. You can't control how you feel because that's just automatic, but what you do with it, how you respond is within your control. What you believe is within your control, right? How you choose to say things to people, what you focus on and the story that you create, right? How you think about things that are happening around you, and to Fred's point, what you watch, read, and listen to right now. The one that I think is really critical is the assuming positive intent. And we talked about that in our course, but that cannot go, we cannot downplay that right now because there's so much happening so quickly. And if we quickly go to a negative intention, or we think we know exactly why something's happened, or why somebody said something, or why somebody did something, and it's not good, that gets us into trouble, and it's very unhealthy for us just in general. So if we can go into it and say, you know what, today I'm going to try and assume positive intent when things go bad, and see how that gets you, right? See where that gets you, and look at the words that you choose. Look at your ability to stop and pause, that sort of that door handle thing where you just stop and be mindful in the moment of where you are and how you're feeling and how you want to respond, right? Take a breath.
Another way to think about that is that really all we were able to see is the impact something is having on us.
Mm-hmm.
We have no way of knowing what the intention of the other person is. And if we can give ourselves and them the opportunity to see that intention as perhaps a mistake or happening for some reason we don't understand, we open up a whole Pandora's box of positive opportunity.
Right. So I have a little challenge for you, and I want you to get a piece of paper because we do that, right? So I want you to think about within your sphere of control, within the things that you can control today, I want you to think about what is one actionable step that you can take today, this morning, to help yourself, whether it be with the level of resilience you feel, whether it be your own mindset, anything that you're struggling with, what is one actionable step that you can take today? And I want you to write it down in this way. You probably recognize this format, but I want you to think, today I will do what? So that I can, what, right? Think about it in that sphere. Today I will, so that I can, and hopefully when we're done, you'll be willing to share some of that with us in the Q&A. I'd love to hear what you say. I want to give you a little example of one that I wrote. It's personal. So I said, you know, today I'll spend time delivering a webinar to clinicians that I care about so that I can provide some support and show gratitude for what they're doing, right? That makes me feel better. So I want you to think about within your sphere of control, what will help you in this process. I hope you found something good. I want to hear about it. And a final thought here as we wrap up, recognize that when you can't control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way you respond to what's happening, because that truly is where your power is. And not only that, you have more power than you think in how you respond. Fred, any final thoughts on that?
No, but I would say with that exercise that we're asking you to do, once you've mastered that skill, give yourself a second challenge and then a third and then a fourth.
That's
Because
right.
it's a constant learning experience.
Absolutely. When things are feeling difficult, when you're feeling just the whirl of it on your shoulders, stop and think to yourself, what is the next actionable step I can take within my sphere of control, right? That helps. And we want to say thank you to you guys for everything that you do so much. The work you do matters. We're happy to be here with you. And thank you for listening to us this morning for this 30 minutes. And I think that's where we end.
So,
well, not quite end.
Yeah.
Wrap up.
Almost.
Part one.
That's right.